So today I want to discuss a concept called self-betrayal. So this is something that you might be familiar with if you've ever encountered this sort of cycle in your life. Self-betrayal is an emotionally addictive cycle that we get into when we promise ourselves that we are going to make a change in our lives and then we don't follow through with that. So this can happen when you decide you're going to improve your life in some way. So you might say, okay, I'm going to start working out, I'm going to start eating healthy. So you make a commitment to change your life for the better, right? This can be anything from communication to lifestyle, any kind of improvement in your life. So that's the first step, is you make a commitment to change for the better. The second thing that happens is that you're going to encounter something called mental resistance. So whenever you try to implement some kind of change in your life, your subconscious mind, which is where your habits are stored, your subconscious mind is going to resist that change. And so your habits that are linked to your old way of being are going to creep up on you and keep you trapped in that habit if you aren't aware of it. But with any change, there will be this mental resistance. And so with this mental resistance, you might slip into an old habit or an old way of being. And so as a result of that, all of these familiar feelings come up of shame, of rage, of guilt, self-hate, self-loathing, that sort of thing from the last time that you maybe didn't follow through with this commitment. So this will then also reinforce that initial negative feeling as you start to give yourself that, self-loathing and that negative self-talk. It kind of just reinforces the cycle. And with that negative self-talk, there might also be some compulsive behaviors that come with that. So for example, if you are dieting and you've made this huge change in your lifestyle, then with that mental resistance, you might feel that restriction being placed on you. And after you maybe have something that wasn't on your meal plan, you then fall into the cycle of self-loathing and negative self-talk. And with that comes the compulsive behavior of maybe overeating, stress eating, binge eating, that sort of thing that is linked to the behavior that you're actually trying to avoid. And then as a result of that, the cycle just repeats itself, because then you are basically, again, repeating the cycle of trying to make another commitment. So a common thing that you might say to yourself is that, this time will be different. This time I am going to keep it on track. And then within a few days or weeks, as a result of that resistance and as a result of not having built up the habit, you end up being the same old version of yourself with no real change. Usually this happens when we have learned this behavior from someone else in our lives. So if you grew up in a family where, maybe your caregivers weren't really focused on their own, self-care for whatever reason it might be, if you watched people in your life self-neglect or just not take care of themselves or make promises to themselves that they don't end up keeping, that it could also be a learned behavior that you then take on yourself. So the reason why this is so damaging is because that whole cycle of making a commitment to change your life for the better and then not being able to follow through, usually because the commitment is too big, that whole cycle of making a promise to yourself and then not keeping it, it impacts your self-esteem, it impacts your self-worth, because then you stop trusting yourself. So this basically decreases your self-trust, and then you are in a position now where you are so frustrated with yourself that you actually feel these very intense emotions of self-hate, self-loathing, shame, guilt, and frustration, because you feel like you might never be able to change. So one way that you can work through this and develop new healthy habits is to make smaller commitments. So instead of committing to one big change that can be very overwhelming to actually follow through with, like if you decide that you're going to change your whole lifestyle, you're going to start working out 5 days a week, even though you don't work out right now at all, and you're going to completely overhaul your diet and you're eating completely new things, that will be very overwhelming for you to actually put into place as a habit. So an alternative would be to make small commitments, small promises to yourself that you can work on maintaining over time. So it needs to be a very small commitment, so small that it will actually be easy and effortless to accomplish. So for example, you can promise yourself that you're going to have 1 glass of water every day. That is a small promise that you can keep every day, and as you keep that promise over time, you will rebuild that self-trust. And then you can start building on that by adding smaller habits onto that. And then over time, you will have big changes as a result of those small promises. If you haven't developed that trust in yourself, then you're not going to feel very good about yourself. And then that will also impact other areas of your life. We are also then more willing to accept this from other people. So when we don't keep our commitments to ourselves, we might not really, consider it when someone else isn't keeping their commitments to us. That cycle of constantly breaking trust within yourself really does impact your self-worth, your self-esteem, because then you don't feel good about yourself because you know that you have continuously made promises to yourself that you aren't keeping. And so overall, that just puts you in a very negative place, and it kind of keeps you in that cycle, because then you make even more demanding, commitments to yourself. As a result of that rage and that feeling of shame and frustration within yourself, you make these big commitments that you know are very, very big, but it's because we are so desperate for that change. So I thought that this would be very helpful, just to share a different approach to maybe making these commitments to yourself. Just make those small promises, commit to that daily, and then as you build that habit, you can add on to that, and you can almost link habits to each other, so that as you're completing one task, you just complete the others at the same time. So I just thought I'd share that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.